Professional Development meeting of 2021. My name is Isabel Gronsky, and I am the current manager of the Young Adult Services Forum. Today, we have a special meeting. We are starting off with a presentation from KaeLyn Rich, who is the author of Girls Resist, A Guide to Activism, Leadership, and Starting a Revolution, a YA activism handbook for young people ready to fight for change, social justice, and equality. She is also a direct action organizer, a nonprofit leader, and a professional speaker. Her community organizing experience dates back to stuffing folders for her parents' union meetings around the dining room table. So KaeLyn is going to share her experiences with and expertise in engaging teens in leading activist work, drawing on her own career as an activist and community organizer. KaeLyn, I think you're going to start with a little bit of a presentation and share some of the facilitated activities that engage youth of all ages in discussions about activism, power, and equality. But we will also have plenty of time for Q&A. So if you can and would like to, please share your name and library in the chat just so that we have that going. As you have questions, drop those in there too. And then just remember, after we wrap up our presentation, we will have a short YASF open board meeting as well for some business. So if there's any additional discussion that can happen then. So I'm going to pass it over to KaeLyn.
That's great. Thank you so much. Isabel, can you remind me how long total should we go today? I want to make sure we
like about an hour.
Perfect. Hi everybody. I'm really excited to be here. And yeah, please go ahead and drop in your library and your name in the chat, your pronouns if you choose to. I'm KaeLyn. My pronouns are she, her. Like Isabel said, I'm the author of Girls Resist, A Guide to Activism, Leadership, and Starting Revolution. Before we get started, I really want to thank you all for having me, especially Joe Marcantonio, who reached out to me, Cynthia Robinson, who got us all set up here, and Isabel Gronsky and Kylie Peters, who I just met. And I'm just really excited to be here with all of the members of the Young Adult Services Forum and their friends. So I thought it would be good. I mean, I hope you all have the book in your library, but if you don't, that's okay. Mostly because I love to see it in libraries. My primary goal, once I took on the project of writing Girls Resist, was just to get it in the hands of young people and remove as many barriers to access as possible. So, actually at my book launch, I gave away a book for every person that bought a book, and also gave away some more books this summer when Black Lives Matter was rising up again to Black girls in particular all around the country. So I'm just very excited when it's in a library, because that means youth have access to it without having to pay for it, without having to go through their parents or their guardians. And it truly makes me happy to both talk to librarians, because quite frankly, I was saying this to Joe, my experience is that librarians in general and YA librarians in particular are kind of the badasses of the library sciences. Like, you all tend to be the coolest, and also the people that will like slide the book over to the young person who needs it at the right time in their life. And you also are like unlicensed counselors and therapists and case managers and other things. So it's truly a pleasure to be here. And I love working with libraries, seeing the book in libraries, and working with the youth that come to your programs. I'm actually doing a program with Allison Riggs, who I see here in the gallery for her youth group later this spring, which I'm looking forward to. So yeah, I'm excited too. I thought it would be good, just for people who are less familiar with the book, which is totally fine, to do a little reading from the front of the book. The book itself is like truly a handbook. It's a guidebook. It's not something that I typically, there's a lot of sections I would not read aloud because I would be boring you. But it does have this really nice little introduction. And when people ask me to do readings, it's typically what I read from, because the section on building a campaign plan is like less exciting to hear read aloud. So it's brief. I think it tells you a little bit about who I am too. One interesting thing about the book and how it's created is that I originally was writing a column for a website called autostraddle.com. It's one of the last standing indie queer websites on the web. And I'm a community organizer by background. I've worked for the ACLU, for Planned Parenthood, and then done some more radical stuff on my own time. I currently work for a radical feminist organization called Ultraviolet that does digital first organizing and rapid response work. So that's sort of my background, and I'm also a writer. So I was writing for Autostraddle as a staff writer. I pitched this idea for a column called Be the Change, kind of tongue-in-cheek, like the fundamentals of organizing, from a queer person to other queer people. And then I sort of shelved it. Like the editors were like, yeah, let's do it as a mini series. And then we just never did it. Similarly, Quirk Books, who is my publisher, they had this idea, and the editor I was working with in particular, who's no longer there, but she used to sort of hold the feminist YA titles. You're probably familiar with a lot of them. Trying to think about the top of my head, The Geek Girl's Guide to the Universe, Basic Witches, a whole bunch of other great books. So Blair over at Quirk Books had this idea for a teen handbook on activism. Okay, so this was like before 2016. And then the 2016 election happened. And what's interesting is like we both, like, this stuff mattered way before Trump, right? But then Trump happened and we both just didn't know each other, but we took these projects off the shelves. So I was like, okay, now is the time. Like, we need to unshelve this and turn it into a longer series on how to fight back. So Be the Change started happening. And then over here, Quirk Books, Blair was like, oh, this is the time to release this book. And as you probably know, there were a whole bunch of books that came out like immediately after the election, either for women or for young adults around activism. And I'm so glad. So there ended up being sort of like a large swath of new literature, fiction and nonfiction to pick from, which was great. So Blair just randomly found me on Twitter, and this is my first and only book, reached out just like cold, and we decided to start working together. So from there on in, it became my project, but I wasn't the one that came up with it to begin with. So originally we were going to write a handbook in a traditional handbook style, meaning not from a first person point of view, sort of like, here are the tips, like a lot of the organizing manuals that already exist out there, but are geared towards a more general audience, AKA a more like white, male, straight, like audience of organizers, older. We started down that path, and both me, my agent, Blair, and I all felt like it's missing something. And we ended up going all the way back and writing it from the first person. So I say this because this introduction is like very much in my voice. And we realized that what was going to make this book different was not only that it had the fundamentals, but that it was approaching it from a personal standpoint. And from there on in, I tried to develop a totally different voice, right? So not the like straightforward guidebook voice, but more of like your cool aunt or maybe your cool local librarian, trying to stay away from being your cool mom, because I really don't want to patronize to be belittling or condescending to young people. And yeah, so that's why, even though it's a handbook, there is a good deal of it that's in the first person and draws on my own experience. Okay, so here's the intro to Girls Resist. And please feel free to let me know in the chat if you can't hear me for any particular reason. Also, I can be a fast talker, especially when I'm off the cuff. So I will say, if I'm going too fast, please flag me down in the chat. I know it's a challenge I have as a speaker, and be happy to adjust and slow down. I'm so sorry. I'm having work done in my house, and I don't know what they need, but they're gonna have to wait a second. Okay. Okay, Girls Resist. This book is for girls. This book is for girls who have something to say, for girls who have something to get off their chests, for girls who are ready to use their voices to slash through injustice. This book is for girls who want to live boldly, who have a red hot fire deep down in their gut, who are smart enough to be mad and bold enough to demand change. This book is for girls who've had enough of inequity, who believe in a world where all people are treated fairly, who care deeply about their own rights and the rights of others. This book is for girls who are loud, who are quiet, who are shy, who are outgoing, who are book smart, who are street smart, who are funny, who are serious, and who are a little bit of all of the above. I wrote this book for girls, for you, because I was once a girl, because I'm the parent of a girl, because I truly believe girls can change the world, and because girl activists have changed the world. The girl revolution began long ago and continues today. Girls Resist is a guidebook, a launching pad, if you're ready to start taking action right now. You'll find everything from starting a campaign and organizing an online petition to fundraising for a cause and talking to the press. You'll find stories of real girl activists who have altered the course of history or are doing so today. You'll find a roadmap to making change happen, whether you choose to start with your hometown, your school, your country, or the whole world. Girls' activism matters because girls are often told that they don't matter. And this harmful judgment is not always as visible as someone saying, you don't matter. It can be much more subtle and hidden. Yes, girls are doing a lot better now compared to decades past. More than ever, girls are participating in every sport and excelling in STEAM fields, science, tech, arts, engineering, math, though girls are still way underrepresented compared to boys. Yes, more young women than men are enrolling in medical and law schools and graduating from college. So why do I think that girls are told they don't matter? Because I remember feeling like I had to look pretty, thin, and white. I remember thinking that being attractive to boys was the most important thing. I remember being in the closet about my bisexuality, being a Korean girl in a mostly white school, being fat, and being afraid to be myself. I remember feeling powerless to stand up to the things that made me feel small, and all the things that seemed unfair about my world. I also remember when I realized I had a voice I could use to speak up for others and for myself. I remember when I came to understand that I could be beautiful without changing a thing about myself. I remember knowing in my gut when something was wrong and wanting to change it for the better. I remember turning my early passions for volunteering and helping people into a crusade for social justice. I am still that girl. I am that woman today. There have been a lot of changes, but girls today are still up against a lot of biases and misperceptions. From a young age, girls are taught through popular media and toys that their worth is linked to their appearance and what others think of them. By contrast, boys are taught their worth is based on their accomplishments and abilities. Society makes girls feel like they have to change themselves to be accepted, that the surface is more important than the depth. These messed up notions are part of a chain reaction of inequity that results in girls and women being more likely to experience depression and loss of confidence. Girls and women are also likely to earn less money and live in poverty. We have fewer powerful female role models to look up to, less access to resources, and reduced rights under the law, and that's just wrong. When girls choose to speak out, we're demanding to be taken seriously. When girls care about issues, we show that we are vital members of society. When girls fight back against discrimination and harassment, we send the message that we'll stand up for ourselves, no matter the consequences. When girls fight on behalf of others, we make it clear that we won't stand for injustice anywhere. The world needs girls' voices rising in protests. It needs girls organizing the girls' resistance. The world needs you. So that is the intro to the book itself. And then from there on in, it gets much less talky about KaeLyn and like slam poetry-esque and more like how to do a campaign plan. Here are some activities. I know it's called Girls Resist. I will say that the book is for, in my opinion, everyone. From a marketing perspective, it made sense to call it Girls Resist. And then what we were really trying to write was a feminist handbook, or a handbook that is geared towards gender minorities who are often talked to about activism and organizing. You know, there are a lot of handbooks out there in the world, some that I've used and been trained on as an organizer, like Midwest Academy, the Rules for Radicals, all these books. And they're primarily written by men, and they're almost always written by white people, and typically for an older audience. In the YA field, there's a lot more books that are kind of inspiration books that are great. And I am excited about them and recommend them and think of them as a companion to what we're doing here, which is a little different, which is writing a book for an audience, for a YA audience, and in particular, really focusing on those who might not feel like, you know, Rules for Radicals is for them. Like there are some young readers who might pick that up and think like, yeah, this is a cool book about organizing. It relates to my life. For a lot of gender minorities and girls, that just doesn't feel like it's for them. So this is a book that's kind of explicitly trying to say, like, however you identify in the spectrum of girlhood, or as a marginalized minority in terms of gender, like this is a book that's speaking to you and taking your whole person into account. And hopefully speaking in a way that comes across as like a cool older person, not trying to tell you what to do. We did have a teen reader read it before it went to print to make sure that we had hit that tone exactly right as a bunch of adults trying to write for young adults. So yeah, so it's really about like passing on the activist mentorship. One of the people talk about like a toolbox, and it is that. It's basically giving people the tools. I like to think of it, and this is particularly gendered in a weird way, as like a recipe. Like it's kind of like passing on a recipe for a cake, just like a plain cake. Like here are the fundamentals. And anyone who has done organizing professionally or personally will pick up this book and like recognize like, yes, these are things that I either know implicitly or if I've been trained in some way, like have learned. So I'm not doing anything revolutionary in terms of giving the tools of the trade. I'm just giving you a basic recipe. And then what excites me is that young people are already well equipped to take that and run with it and make it their own. So I'm giving you this like kind of boring, simple recipe. You can do whatever you want to it once you have the basic foundation for the recipe in front of you. You can add sprinkles, you can make the cake into cupcakes, you can make it into cookies, you can like completely throw it out and do something different with the basic components of like flour, eggs, water, right? So it's really just about putting the tools in someone's hand, putting the recipe in someone's hand, and then letting young adults shape it in ways that I can't even fathom yet. Quite frankly, I think young people are way smarter than I was when I was like a younger young people, and have like solutions and ideas that are beyond what I can even comprehend. And I'm excited about that. I'm excited for them to lead us in the future. They're already doing it. So some of the things that make this book different than other both YA titles and other handbooks that are for a more general adult audience is that what it means to have kind of a feminist lens or a gender lens on activism is that it's not just about, it is about like how to do a press release, how to raise money, how to do something if you don't have any money, but it is also, there's a whole section on intersectionality and thinking about these issues in a complex way. There's a whole section on like what people often call allyship, or like speaking up and standing up for other people. And there's also a whole section on self-care. And that was really important to me to include those things as I wrote the book. So I totally forgot that I have a PowerPoint that I'm going to pull up now. Just to share some visuals on the book itself. Okay. All right. So yeah, I mean, I really believe that young people already know what they're going to do or what they're mad about. There isn't really a problem with that. I'm going to like quickly talk through one of the activities that I've done with young people. That is also available in an educator guide that I will like drop the link to, and that I found has been extremely successful in working with youth across all ages as well as adults. So I've been doing these activities with, because I go to a bookstore and who knows who's going to show up. Sometimes the youth are as young as, the youngest I've had is 4 in a group, or that being sort of like the median age. And, you know, the oldest I've had is like older teens, adults, and it really can be adapted for anyone. So this is just an example of sort of the skills building in the book. So this is an example page on like showing versus telling in terms of making a persuasive argument. So kind of dry material, but we try to make it fun. As you can see, we're really trying to not talk down to youth. Like we're not shying away from things like reproductive rights or LGBT people and rights in the examples that we use, because they're often examples from my own life. You know, these are petitions I have written or researched myself. And like I just talked about, it does also include things about self-care and community care and how to sort of take care of yourself and each other and have a support network. Because especially for young people, it's not always true that they have the support of their community. It's not always true that they have the support of their parents. And doing this work does like open you up to risk, particularly when you're not a white man, but have like other kinds of identities that might put you more in the margins. So thinking about how you're taking care of yourself and taking care of your peers is a part of activism that is equally important to how to make a campaign plan. Okay, so there is available this parent and educator guide. I'll drop the link when I'm out of the slideshow just because it's hard to pull up the chat. So this is available on Quirk's website. I helped create the content for it. I also have tested out a lot of the activities in it as I've been doing workshops around the US, particularly when this book came out in 2018. I was doing a lot more of them. I'm excited to do my first virtual one with Allison in just a few months. So this is through Quirk, but I wrote most of the content. So this is some examples of what you'll find in there. This is the first page of like a campaign plan checklist. There's some like tangible resources. So let's say you're like starting a group or something. This is a sign-up sheet sample. This is like a poster or sign sample if you want to like quickly whip up an action. There's some discussion questions. When I do this program with small groups, I actually follow this pretty closely. I often do one of these discussion questions as an icebreaker. I would say the first 2 are most applicable to a gender diverse group. So I'm often doing workshops for boys, girls, and people of all genders, but like a mixed gender group. And everyone has an answer for like, when was the first time you heard about activism? Or one of the questions that's on here that I sort of modified is like, what comes to mind to you? What images or pictures do you think of when you think of the term activism? And that's useful, and that people, even if they don't have like feelings that can be hard to access with young people, they can usually imagine like things they've seen on TV or in videos when they think about like what activism looks like. I mean, if I was to ask you that question, I'm guessing you would have like similar answers. Hold on. Beep, boop, boop. Yeah, no. The bad thing about screen sharing, as I'm sure you all know, is like it's really challenging to get your chat back up. So, but I'd love to hear when we come back thinking about what things come to mind for you when you think about activism. Oh, thank you so much, Andrea. Appreciate that. And this next one that I'm going to go through is an actually activity in the book. It's the Power Up Brainstorm. It's how I start every program. It is impossible to do a program for youth in like an hour span and teach them how to make a campaign plan like all the way through, or like, you know, it's also not that fun for them. It's like going way beyond where they are for day one. So this is a great way to start the conversation and also to get them geared up for having that next conversation or picking up the book and reading more and thinking more about what they want to do with their power. And it really is, in my opinion, you can't start doing activism until you start thinking about systemic power. Who has it, who doesn't, and how we shift that, which is where organizing comes in. So this isn't, I don't have the whole thing up here. It's in the parent guide if you want to look at it. But basically, we use the first chapter of the book. It's like literally the very first thing in the book. And then do this activity to start thinking together about what it means to feel powerful and feel powerless. So I'm going to get out of this and just show you. Yeah, okay. So on the very first page of the first chapter of the book, this is the illustration that you're gonna see. And you can see they're just kind of like floating heads of people. I like to describe this in terms of like training the trainer as like these aren't real people. Sometimes with young people, they want to know if these like represent like actual people in the world. Like, is that Linda Sarsour? Is that Obama or something? So especially when they're on the younger side. So it's not. These are just like imaginary people you might run into in your local grocery store or wherever is like culturally relevant for where you live. Random people that you don't know. You're just looking at their faces. So this is kind of like a illustration. It reminds me of the game Guess Who, if y'all remember that. Just random people. All we know about them is what they look like. So there's like the white man in a suit, brown-skinned woman in a suit, a woman wearing hijab and perfect cat eye eyeliner, someone who looks like maybe a little more androgynous, or short hair and lipstick. We've and as you might saying these, like we're just assuming these based on looking at them, right? But we don't actually know any of this is true, but we're guessing this. A black baby girl, a woman in construction gear, black man in a suit, black older woman, and a young white boy. So without saying anything about these pictures, not even describing them like I just did, we just start with creating a chart, more powerful, less powerful, or like plus and minus signs like a battery, and clarifying power means like not power turning on the lights, but like power to do things or be in the world. And I just asked them, looking at these pictures, who has the most or the least power, and the least power. Like pick who has the most power, pick who has the least power, either as like a whole group or break them into small groups. You know, much like Guess Who came under fire eventually for their lack of diversity and race and gender of available characters. It's been updated since. Playing this game reveals implicit biases that we all have. So this is actually, I first tested this activity way before I wrote the book. I was doing a program for Girls Rock Rochester, which is our local girls rock camp. My mom is a first grade teacher, thank goodness, because it was the first time, this is when I was an organizer at Planned Parenthood, that I had to explain organizing and power and things like that to really young kids, so like 7 and 8. And I went to my mom because I was like, I don't know how to break down these really complex concepts for little kids. And her advice to me as an educator was make it visual, like use visuals to help them understand the concepts. And I did like a Google image search and basically did this, but a much less pretty version of it, of just like a whole bunch of people cut out and asked them to put them in order. And that's where the idea for this in the book came from. So adults tend to have less creative answers to this than young people. I'm guessing if I did this with you right now, I could guess who most of you would pick for most powerful and least powerful. There may be some outliers. Young people can actually, sometimes they align with that and they all pick the same things. Often they come up with these really fantastic creative answers. So one of my favorites is, young people will say like, well, the little girl in the top corner has the most power because she's the youngest. And so she has her whole life ahead of her to like do whatever she wants, right? Whereas like other people have already lived life and they've already like, they don't have as much time to do the things they want to do. There's no wrong answers. which is the nice thing. What it really does is like help people start to think about why when they look at someone, they make assumptions. And then we start going through the answers, again, knowing that there's not like a wrong or right, and thinking about like who is more powerful, not your personal opinion, but in the world. When you think about what we see on TV or on social media, in books you might read, like what are we supposed to assume about who society has the most power, who has the least power? And again, kids is like toddlers, like kids my daughter's age can understand this, which is wild. Like they've already been exposed to enough media in their life that they can already tell you without even knowing why sometimes, like, yeah, that white guy probably has like the most like money and stuff. And they can already tell you like, oh yeah, the person in the construction hat doesn't have as good of a job, quote unquote, as like the person in the suit. Right. And so we start breaking down like what those things actually are and it brings up conversations on race, gender, sexual orientation, class, religion, immigration status, skin color, age, ability, gender expression, and like more and more. And we end up with this really fantastic list of like people who have more power systemically, people who have less. But we don't stop there because that would be a very depressing place to end the program, especially if you're working with youth who have those more marginalized identities or more than one of them. So this brings us into a conversation about organizing and what it means. So like, yes, and this also comes to that first time we did the program at Girls Rock Rochester, one of the kids in that younger age group, after we did this activity with my little Google search image version of this, and they'd all decided, okay, like the little black girl has the least power, like the little black baby. She raised her hand and was like, and this is like forever blew my mind, because I was not planning for it to go this way. She raised her hand and said, wait, miss, like, yes, this little girl has the least power right now, but if when a baby cries, an adult, who like all the adults are on the other side, has to come and take care of it. So maybe she has the most power. And that is precisely, it's a great example. It's precisely what community organizing is. It is taking those of us who systemically are being told, you don't have the power, we have the power, and banding together, working collectively to cry the loudest, to raise our voices to the point that those who already have the power have to give it up, or have to give some of it up, or have to give us what we want and meet our demands. And that is the power of community organizing. It's not just about, this activity is not just about understanding oppression and privilege. It's also thinking about like, okay, but what happens when, I mean, honestly, the people on the powerful side tend to be pretty homogenous. You can kind of imagine who they are, right? You can think of maybe some of our more recent presidents, current and past, like they're white, they're college educated, they're male, like all of these things. And then all these people over here, it's like a really cool group of people that I want to hang out with. And we think about like, if these people work together, who have less systemic power, to cry the loudest, to like make the biggest amount of noise, and to demand that these people over here, who actually are not the majority of people, they just have the most power, and demand of the people who have that, give that to them. That's what community organizing is about. That's why we have a campaign plan. That's why you might want to read this book if this is something that excites you. So, I think helping young people who already have great ideas around why they should do activism and what's wrong in the world, they have a much better sense than even we do about it. That's not what this book is about, nor do I think they really need it for the most part. Like the kids that are picking this book hopefully are already like mad about something, even if they can't place their finger on it, and just want to know like how to like lock into doing something. So I really think the key to helping young adults move to that place of taking action is to helping them unlock their own power and their ability to like build their voice and build collective power with other people. Youth really are the catalysts right now for the change we want to see in the world. And they already have a lot of what they need, even if they don't have a lot. So getting to that point of like understanding and owning the power to harm, as well as the power to help, the power to speak up, the power to listen, and to build new movements and better ideas. That's what excites me about writing this book. I've never wanted to tell young people how to change the world because I don't know. They have better ideas than I do. That said, I really believe that young adults can and will like organize us into a better future. And like a lot of you, I'm really excited to follow their lead. So that is Girls Resist, and a quick little activity that you could use with your own groups if you want to. I believe the like formal question and answer period is open if anyone has questions or just comments. I would also love to hear, like, what are you hearing from your young people? That's really exciting to me to hear. What kind of things are you doing with them that might also be useful to your peers? So feel free to drop any of that in the comments. Or one thing we use at work that works pretty well for large groups is we do something called a stack. So if you're really excited and want to say something, let's say this like Q&A really gets jumping, feel free to just write stack in the chat and we'll make sure that like you're the next person we get to and we don't lose you in the flow. So does anyone have questions? How long do you usually spend doing the kind of workshop you described? That is a great question. So that it can be expanded or brought back down. I would say like that piece of the workshop itself with all of the like talking that I just did can range anywhere from half an hour to an hour. For a longer workshop, I'm going to really expand on the concepts. And this is usually with older kids. Younger kids, we move through it a little more quickly, mostly in that they like are pretty sure of their answers. They just are like, yeah, this is like what it is in the world. This is my worldview. You know, some of the things that we might talk about, for example, especially with older kids, are implicit bias. So the question is like, why do you know these things? And we do this with young kids too, but it goes faster because they're like TV. But like older kids, you can have more of like more breakouts, more like conversation about like, oh yeah, like really get them riled up about why they think all these things and like ultimately how messed up that is. You know, so we'll do a little bit of that, like talking about schemas, like how your brain works. And again, a lot of this context is in the book, so you can kind of like pick out the parts that are helpful to this section from the first chapter, where the first chapter, I basically ask people to do this activity on their own. It's much more fun together. But what's also in there is the sort of like debrief of like, why do we think this way that we can use. So I'd say like 30 minutes to an hour, probably closer to an hour if you're doing all of the like teaching too. And I should say if it's something you want to do, I'm not actually trying to like sell myself here, but I am going to be like converting this to an online program for the first time with Allison. So I'd be happy to like talk to people about meeting with your youth if you're doing online stuff right now. What sort of actions have students taken? This is a great question. Okay, so well, I mean like around the world or like in response to the book are kind of two different questions. I mean, like obviously people are watching what like Greta Thunberg is doing. I could like name them forever. There's like so many girl activists that are doing really great stuff. Jazz Jennings, Malala, the list goes on. Emma Gonzalez, like in terms of like response to the book primarily, yeah. So I don't always know what the like follow through on the actions are, to be honest. I will say I've gotten fan mail from a significant number of youth who like feel really like fired up about the book and I like talk about like starting their own campaigns. I did hear from a friend who was like a colleague at a different Planned Parenthood affiliate a long time ago that her and it was like oh, it was amazing. Her niece started this is again like what you do with it is like up to you. There was a teacher that was getting fired at their school and all of the students did not want the teacher to be fired. I do not know the situation. I just know that was like the perspective that the students had. And her niece, like who she'd gifted this book, used the book to organize a like whole campaign to keep the teacher on staff and like had come to Aunt Jen because she had like a mock like press release and some other stuff that she wanted her to look at. She knew she was an organizer and Jen was like super duper proud. She was like, it was so good. They were doing like a rally and they had a petition and they had like a press release and they were talking to the media about it. And I have no idea if that teacher like deserved to stay or go. It's not my business. But it was really exciting to hear that like someone was able to put the component parts together. My first fan mail is from a 9-year-old whose mom was reading it as a bedtime book, which I think is a very strange use for it. But like I'm glad it resonated. What kind of we do as librarians to encourage civic engagement and activism, especially as many of us are public librarians and have our hands tied with political subjects? Yeah, I mean, you all are like the most subversive people in that you find ways. you know, the first time I heard from someone, not like specifically like a letter or fan mail from a reader, but someone who was using the book was actually when we had sent the ARCs out. And, you know, of course, we're sending them out to YA librarians. And there was a student who was trying to organize, who was being reprimanded actually for trying to organize around gun safety. This was back related to like the national student walkouts, and her school librarian had like very quietly slipped her the arc of the book, which was just the first 3 chapters, which I guess she used to start like fighting back at her school against like the discipline that she and some of her friends were facing for trying to organize around the, I forgot what it was called now, but like the gun safety. Why am I blanking on the name? It's like orange logo, but you all know what I'm talking about. So I think like subversively what you can do, March for Our Lives. Thank you, Isabel. What you already do, I assume, which is to like listen to students and make this and other resources, not just this, like other resources that make sense for them, like available to them when it seems like they need guidance. I will say for me, I grew up doing a lot of service volunteer work, which was sort of my entree later in life into activism. So I think another way to encourage civic engagement in a way that's permissible and will not get you fired is to bring youth into thinking about what are political issues, but schools and public libraries are maybe less likely to flag them if you're talking about them more broadly, like anti-poverty initiatives, or you know, organizing resources for local food banks, or even to get more radical, maybe local mutual aid networks in this pandemic. A lot of those have cropped up. It could be around, I mean, it could be around the issues that are most important to them, of course, but in terms of like doing a program that won't get you in trouble, you know, you're probably gonna wanna stay away from whatever is controversial in your area, birth control, etc. But you can definitely do other things that are political, that are about like the dignity of all people, and everything has like a race and class and gender lens, right? If you put it into it. So whether that is anti-poverty, whether that's food scarcity, whether that is even like literacy and reading, trying to think of other ones that like public libraries would be like, oh yeah, that's fine. Whether that is like people who are unhoused, homeless people, and like the rights and dignity, working with organizations that provide resources to those who are currently unhoused, and then getting the kids to think critically about like, what is that about? Like, why is that happening? Teen suicide rates, and who's like at the center of that. There's like, you know, an increasing epidemic in our country right now in the pandemic, especially for LGBTQ kids, etc. Yeah, so I hope that's helpful. You mentioned rules for radicals, a favorite of high school me, but you're right about being a guy for white men. Yeah, I mean, not explicitly, but implicitly, right? Women and people of color cannot demonstrate in the same way as evidenced by recent historical protests. Yeah, are there some tips for how we can encourage safety and activism for our diverse and young populations? That is a really good question. So, yes. So I think, you know, it's different. Like the level of risk is, as we've seen just a month ago, of risk is really different for people of color, for women, especially like people of color, though broadly, like people of color who are women, like women of color, LGBTQ people of color, Black and Indigenous people, like it is very different when they go to a protest or an action or try to organize something, how they're going to be treated by law enforcement, how they're going to be treated by the media, etc. I'll be honest, there are things that you can't do. Like, I mean, I think this is why there's a section on self-care and on standing up. Like, you know, you can do as much as you can, but we still live in a world that wants some people to exist more than others. That said, there are also like things around safety planning that you can do and prepare young people for, which can be a little bit scary, but should be like seen through the framework of like what you're doing is serious work. And it can have serious consequences, not because what you're doing is wrong, but because the world sees the work you're doing as threatening to the status quo, which is pretty badass, but also could come with some like scary consequences. So things like having a safety plan, and some of this is in the book, things like going out with a buddy or if you're like capable of being an adult chaperone to like a rally or protest or on a campaign, to like having adults who are less likely to be, for example, targeted by police around could help. So like Joe, as like a light-skinned man, you would be useful to be like present and around when people are doing things that might attract attention. And also to give them permission. I think young people sometimes can get, now this sounds like patronizing, but it's a little bit true, get like caught up in the moment and not have thought through the safety plan, right? And those of us that are like more experienced organizers just know like how serious that can be. It's not that it's wrong. Like you are supposed to get caught up in the moment. They're designed to like rally people, literally. But for young people, just like developmentally, they haven't always stopped to think about like, what's gonna happen if I get arrested? Do I have the resources to get bailed out? Will I get in trouble with my school or with my parents? So sitting down as you're like, when you're getting to the point of like thinking about safety, there are lots of organizations that can do training for you on both like regular protest tips and civil disobedience tips. And there also is just, you could just make a safety plan in terms of like who you're going out with, what are your boundaries around when things get too intense, and what are you gonna do, where are you gonna go, who are you gonna call, in a worst case scenario. I'm assuming in this case, we're talking about like public facing activism. So like rallies, protests, actions. In the worst case scenario, like who can like come and get you? How can you get transportation? And who's sort of like your safety contact? And thinking through things like civil disobedience, which can be really easy to jump into if you don't know where the line is. So like just teaching about that, like what is like legally permissible and what is not. And what are situations where it doesn't matter where it's legally permissible or not, you could still get in trouble. Like when things are escalating. Great. And adults do that too. Like we'll have affinity groups where we're like, okay, this is the 2 or 3 people I'm gonna stay with, and we're gonna make a decision before we go in based on who's the most vulnerable in our group about what we're gonna do. So like if the riot gear comes out, we have someone that's gonna lose their job if they get arrested, we're out of there. If the protest turns into civil disobedience, we're not going to do that today, or the opposite. Like we all feel comfortable doing it. We're going to stay. We're going to take care of each other until one of us feels uncomfortable. So yeah, those are some groups, some tips. I hear a lot about remaining politically neutral in libraries and having to give both sides of anything when talking about activism. To me, plenty of things are made political, but aren't actually endorsing a political party or candidate that would be banned as public employees. It would feel disingenuous to attempt to be neutral and present both sides when plenty of people get hurt and things might affect teens' identities or my own. Ooh. So I can give my advice, but I actually would love to open the floor for other people because I think this is a really challenging place that I imagine a lot of you are troubling through together. So for me, you know, I work at a feminist organization. My level of risk is pretty low around what I say. And that said, even as I was writing this book, I had to keep checking in with my publisher because I wasn't sure. Like I was like, are people going to be okay with this book that's for young people if I talk about things like, I'm queer and bisexual, but like if I talk about things like LGBTQ rights and like transgender rights specifically, because there's a huge backlash against that right now. Things like birth control, like a lot of my work has been in reproductive rights. So like, can I include that in the book or not? And they really felt like, and I agreed, like, but schools don't always feel this way. Libraries don't always feel this way. Public institutions don't always feel this way, that like young people are smart and will sort of self-select into whether this book is right for them or not. So like, this is not a politically neutral book and it wasn't designed to be. If young people are more into like, if their radical politics are more QAnon than like Antifa, like this isn't gonna be the book for them. I will say, like, I did try to meet a lot of people in the middle. So like if people are not having any position about any of those things, but are like common sense, I think this book still appeals. In terms of you all, I think drawing a line, especially, so one of my jobs was at the ACLU, and we dealt with a lot of free speech issues, although I'm not an attorney. I will say, like, it's easier to draw the line in terms of what is like political and what is not when it comes to protected identities. So depending on what the laws are in your state, for example, things like women's rights are not, and things like discrimination against women, against LGBTQ people, against people of color, maybe LGBTQ people, it depends on your state laws, and what happens at the federal level. But people who are like basically in a protected class, like it's very hard legally for an institution to make an argument against talking about the civil rights movement, for example, because it's history, or even the current civil rights movement. It's like history. It's about discrimination against Black people, and silencing that just on the basis of like that as political speech. Like it goes the other way. If you say no political speech, you also have to say like no anything at all. And that would like really go against the purpose of a library to not have anything at all about our recorded history on political movements. So yeah, I agree that presenting both sides does not make sense. Like, so if you're talking about like LGBTQ rights, it would not make sense to also talk about like discrimination against LGBTQ people. And depending on your state laws, it may be like, you maybe have an argument there that it's like impermissible anyways. Other people have advice though. I feel like you might have some good ideas within this group. For the question, that the prompt is like, it would feel disingenuous to attempt to be neutral and present both sides when plenty of people get hurt and things might affect teens' identities or my own. Any advice for reconciling this? Lyndon, do you have an example? Oh, okay. So a topic and what you're trying to do with that topic?
Is it okay if I say it's faster than typing?
Yeah, please.
Okay, awesome. I guess the example would be exactly the kind of thing that you just said about like, you know, this idea that if I have like pro-transgender books, I have to have anti-transgender books. Or if I'm giving a program on activism and I say, you know, here's things you can get involved with to talk about trans rights, you know, access to public spaces, everything. I have to go and say, and here's the people who are yelling at us that we shouldn't have any rights. And yeah.
To be honest, I'd have to look into what the laws are of your state, but you have to be respectful of people's identities. Yeah, I totally agree with what KaeLyn just put there. My argument, which may or may not be work with some people, is that being respectful of people of all identities is not political. Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I would totally agree with that. I mean, I think it's a harder argument if the question is like, can I talk about, well, I could bring it up, but like if I talk about like birth control, is that something that's like, impermissible? I don't think healthcare is like birth control is political, but I understand that some people really, really, really do. I think what you just described honestly sounds like a lawsuit waiting to happen on their side. I know that doesn't help you with like navigating the personal relationships at work, but like frankly, even if it's not a protected class in your state, like it sounds like something that you could reach out to the ACLU about if you were caused harm or prohibited from like having materials in your library that are pro transgender people existing and being respected. Correct. Rachel says, specifically anything that negates someone's identity, that's not an opinion we're obliged to respect. Yeah, I'd agree. Also, it sounds like you're going through some stuff, Lyndon, and I'm sorry that is happening to you. It's probably very frustrating. Also, I'd be happy to like truly give you the ACLU of Illinois contact information. Cannot guarantee they would be interested, but I can say like that kind of a free speech case is pretty cut and dry. Any other questions, either or other like thoughts about like specific things that you're dealing with in your profession, in your field, or in your library? Are there collection development policies in regards to peer-reviewed materials? Because one side will not be reviewed. That's a good thought. Yeah, ALA is also a good recommendation for anything related to like book challenges, banned books. I mean, I'll be honest, some ACLU departments have like 3 people in them for the whole state, so I cannot guarantee that things will happen. That said, there is like an investment from the ACLU like nationally in terms of supporting programs that are fighting back against banned books in particular. And like an LGBT program exists pretty much everywhere specifically.
I also want to mention to Lyndon that for better or worse, teen services generally kind of gets ignored. I don't know if you've tried to just add books that you want without the opposing side and see what happens. Because generally those rules seem to be for adults and kids, and then they forget that we have teen collections until we get a complaint from a parent that says, "I found this on the shelf."
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case, that it's just kind of ignored. I think more of the definitely more of the like neutrality in programming is something I hear a lot about, or like, you know, if I'm putting a display of books up, I hear a lot about having to give both sides of anything. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think especially, I'm assuming this is a public library. So I will say ACLU might be helpful if it's not a public, if you're not a public employee, but because in this specific situation, it is a public library, like that is a government regulated entity, and like specifically the promise of the Constitution is between the government and the people. So
I just want to say, like, this isn't directly related, but one program that we're doing right now at Skokie is in our Discord server. We're doing like a Spot the Disinformation. You know, so it's like I post like a viral rumor, and then they have to say if it's true or not true, and like state the reasons. And so hopefully by like bribing them to develop critical thinking skills with GameStop gift cards, which are hilarious right now. And they totally love them. They're like really actually competing for them. That's a way that I can get some political conversation that is specifically about information literacy.
love that.
I've done sort of the same thing in the past and framed it as like current events and not political. So having the conversation about this is what's going on in the news, and then let's talk about it, and acting more as a facilitator than like a lecturer telling them what they should or shouldn't be supporting. And then they kind of get to, you know, moderate themselves and kind of call each other out on things instead of me having to like jump in and do anything like that. And then I don't have a lot of success with my Discord server or in-person programming before pandemic, but I did a lot of passive programming in the vein of like Ask Me Anything, like on Reddit, and using like actual teens to be the answers and like representing these identities that are marginalized or that people might not agree with, and then being able to sort of like intercept at that point, like seeing a teen going to write a question on a whiteboard that maybe is not okay, and then kind of like stopping them and being like, this is a real person answering these questions. I didn't just make this up and throw it up there. Like, stop and think about the real person that you could be harming. And then that's a way to, like, it's a political conversation, you know, having somebody who wrote up that they are you know, a gay student from a conservative Christian family ask me anything, and having that kid that could maybe have a sort of bigoted opinion, but like being able to stop them before they like finish and have that thought process of like, why am I doing this? Like, this is a real person. Let me think about this. So I think like trying to think of these different ways of doing it. No, this is in the teen room. Like, nobody's coming in there except teens. There's no parents to come through and be like, why'd you write this up on the whiteboard? So I think finding those spaces that you can do kind of more of the political where people are like, the adults don't pay attention and they don't care. That's the same thing. Like I had a Black Lives Matter display up years ago, but when I put it by the teen room, nobody complained because they didn't come past there. But the minute it was in the lobby, it was like instant, why is this up here? So I think finding those spaces where you can do this, because there are teens who want to see these books, who want to engage this way, and doing it in a way that can kind of be under the radar, if possible.
That's great advice. I knew you all would have like good answers. Also, you are truly like the most subversive, among the most subversive groups of people, not working directly in campaigns. Any other either advice for each other or questions, stories? And I should say the questions can also, we're like pretty close to time, so it's totally fine if there's not, but the questions can also be about like the book itself or me or whatever. It doesn't always have to, it can be whatever you want.
KaeLyn, now that you're adapting a presentation for Allison for our library, are you willing to be doing this for other libraries?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, some of my favorite programs have been, and like typically if we weren't in pandemic, I would travel for them as much as I'm able to. I often like break even on library programs because y'all don't have like good budgets and it's not your fault. But I love to get in front of youth. So like truly, yes, like even if you are worried about cost, I'd be willing to talk to you about it. Mostly in that I just want to be, I want the information to get into the hands of young people in whatever way possible. Yes, I would absolutely put my, yes. It was actually in the PowerPoint and then I kind of like abandoned the PowerPoint. So you can find me pretty much anywhere on social media at KaeLyn Rich. And then that's my email as well. And my website if you want to contact me that way. Oh, sure. And the PowerPoint's mostly pictures, but I'd be happy to share the PowerPoint. Yeah. Great.
So if we don't have any more questions, I think we can wrap it up. And thank you so much, KaeLyn, for joining us. And hopefully you'll be hearing from a lot of us about doing additional programming. Thank you all for joining. I think we can end the recording so that we can give people a couple minutes and then we'll get started with the Young Adult Services Forum business. So KaeLyn, if you have any last words, go for it.
Oh yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for hosting. I will make sure you have, I think someone up top shared the parent educator link, but I'll send that as well as the PowerPoint back to Joe or Isabel, someone, and make sure you all get it. Thank you so much for coming. This was a fun way to spend my lunch break and I had a lot of fun. So thanks, good luck. Thanks for all that you do.